So can you match the performance of an $800 shaft with something that's hundreds of dollars cheaper? Say $300 or maybe even $50? Well, it turns out you can. We're going to talk about how, we're going to talk about why, and we're going to talk about it right now. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm AJ. I hope you're having a wonderful day. So hopefully you've seen the video that I just finished and was just released with Mr. Shortgame talking all about and trying out the Autoflex shaft and comparing it with some other shafts that I brought him to see if we could match the results of the Autoflex and do it in a much less expensive way. Now, I did a video about the Autoflex shaft about 1.5 years ago where I said, look, you don't need to spend $800 on a shaft to get the same results. And to be fair, I got a lot of crap about that video. While I got a lot of good responses, I also got a lot of people just telling me, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't have an Autoflex shaft there to test it against, so you're just making stuff up. And basically you're just trying to make yourself feel better about not having the $800 to spend on that shaft or something along those lines. And you know what? I get it. If that was your opinion, that's fine. That's your prerogative to not believe what I'm saying. Now, turns out I was completely right. But again, that's not the important part of this video. The important part is that you don't need to spend $800 on a shaft to get the same results. So, 1.5 years after I did that initial video, it took me a while to come around back to this topic, but did a collaboration with Mr. Shortgame where we tested out the Autoflex shaft versus Project X Even Flow Riptide and this Fujikura Motore shaft that's actually a discontinued model. And I don't want to ruin it for you if you haven't seen it, so close your ears, spoiler alert, but all these shafts performed pretty much equally well in our testing. When it came down to it, the most popular shaft, or his favorite shaft of the three, he said, if he was going to go play 18 holes for money, was the $50 Fujikura shaft. Okay, so the basic rule here, if we are talking about the Autoflex shaft, was basically what I said in the previous video is you want to drop two flexes, and you want to drop at least one weight class. Now, when I say drop two flexes, that means if you are usually playing a stiff shaft, then you're going to skip regular and go down into light flex, go down into a senior flex, whatever you want to call it, basically the step below regular. And that is what I did with both of these shafts. The other thing, the other spec we want to look at altering is the weight. You want to drop the weight, I say at least one weight class. Now, when I say a weight class, we're basically talking about 10-gram increments. So if you are at a 60-gram or a 60-something gram weight, which is in general probably what most of us are playing in our drivers right now, so we want to drop into that 50-gram range. Specifically, if we're talking about the Autoflex, then we definitely want to be in that 50-gram range because that's where all of these shafts sit. Now, there's a third factor that also comes in, and that is the profile of the shaft, the bend profile, or how the shaft, how the stiffness of the shaft is laid out throughout its length. And basically, you can find this information on any shaft. Now, it was a little trickier with this Autoflex shaft. So when I initially first made up this shaft, way back like 1 year ago, trying to match up the results, I didn't really know the bend profile of this shaft. I looked at some video, I looked at some slow motion of this shaft to try and get an idea, and I took my best guess at what kind of bend profile it was, and turns out I was pretty close, but I didn't know the exact bend profile. Now, there is a website, it's called golfshaftreviews.info, and it's run by a guy who basically gets most or almost all of the big name aftermarket shafts, and he basically just measures them all out very precisely. And he measures the weight, he measures the balance point, he measures how symmetrically they bend, and he measures the bend profile. And it's all very objective, which I like, right? It's just a bunch of measurements. It's not somebody swinging the club, hitting it, and telling you what they feel or what they think of it. It's purely just based on measurements. So I really like that, because what it allows you to do is you can find one shaft in there and you can find the specs on it. And if you know you like that shaft, well, guess what? You've got all the information you need to find another shaft that is going to perform similar. So I knew this shaft has a very similar bend profile and how it flexes to the Autoflex shaft. Now, as you can see, and if you watch the Mr. Shortgame video, you will see that the results in all three were very, very similar. And luckily, Mr. Shortgame is a great driver of the golf ball, so he was very consistent. Of all the shots he hit, I think only 2 or 3 on that range would have missed the fairway if he was playing on the course. He was very consistent, and even when he was, really going after some of them to try and get as much speed as he could, we were still getting good numbers, we were still getting good data, and the ball flight was still really consistent. So very good overall. And what you notice is, and again, you can kind of try and pick them apart, but what I really look at them and see is all three of them, and again, we're talking $800, we're talking $300, we're talking $50, all three of them were very, very similar in the results that he was getting. Okay, last part of the video, what shafts would I pick if I wanted to try out the Autoflex idea, if I wanted to experiment with an Autoflex shaft but didn't want to spend $800? So this shaft, the Project X Riptide, Even Flow Riptide, and it's the counterbalance version, very similar in specs to this Autoflex shaft. Now, this Autoflex shaft that we actually tested with Mr. Shortgame is the 505, which is kind of the middle of the road flex version. There's a couple that are stiffer, there's a couple that are softer. This one's right in the middle. And when I spec'd this shaft out, I was thinking that he was using the slightly stiffer version. So this shaft is actually a little bit stiffer than what the Autoflex is. And again, you can see it when I measured it out, the frequency of it. This shaft is definitely stiffer. Now this shaft is still, as far as I know, a current model shaft. Again, this is Even Flow Riptide CB. So this is the small batch version, which has this little logo here, which basically means the tolerances are going to be a little bit tighter, but they also make a just non-small batch version, which is a little less expensive. If you are trying to get in the X or double X version of the Autoflex, I think this shaft in the 40 in a 5.0 is going to give you very similar results. Again, this was actually a little bit stiffer than the Autoflex was in the version that Mr. Shortgame had, but it's still, again, the results were very similar. Now, if you are in sort of that 505 or in the more flexible versions of the Autoflex, well, then I would look at the 40 in the 4.0, which is even more flexible. But again, the profile is still going to be the same. The weight is going to be very similar, and you will get very similar results at less than half the price. Now, if you want to go even cheaper, this was the Fujikura Motore F3, and this was 55 grams in a light flex. Now, this shaft I paid $50 for because it is a discontinued shaft. This shaft came out 10 years ago, so the technology in that new Autoflex shaft, turns out a shaft from 10 years ago had enough technology to keep up with it. But this shaft may be harder to find because it is an older shaft, it is discontinued, and especially when you get into the more obscure weight flex designations, i.e. the super light, the super flexible, or super stiff, they make fewer of those to start with, so you're not going to be able to find as many of those. You may not be able to find the Motore original F3. Now, Fujikura did come out with a reboot of this shaft, a new version, which is the Motore X, and that comes in the F3, which again is that mid-profile, that mid-launch, which is similar to the Autoflex. And you can find it in lighter weight versions, and again, you can find it in the more flexible versions. In this case, they went away from calling it a light flex, and I think they designate it as an R2. Now, I think the R2 may be slightly stiffer than this old light flex. I'm not sure about that, but it may be slightly stiffer. However, that being said, this shaft, when I built it, I actually tipped it. I actually cut an inch off the tip, again, trying to match up as best I could what I saw from the Autoflex just in watching people hit it. So this shaft is actually a little bit stiffer than the light flex designation. So I think if you can't find this shaft, you can look for the Motori X F3 in the R2 flex designation, again in that 50 gram, 55 gram weight class. These are, I believe, $225 new at retail. So again, basically a quarter of the price of the Autoflex. Okay, there you go. You wanted proof? Well, hopefully I've given you enough proof now that we can definitively say you don't need to spend $800 on this Autoflex shaft to get the same kind of results. Again, if you understand what are the important specs and you know what specs you're starting out with, you can find another shaft that will perform just as well for you as the original. If you enjoyed this video, please go down below, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you'll be alerted when I post new videos. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Mobile Club Maker, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.